Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast bi-week edition. I'm Michael Bruntz, joined by Brian Christopherson. We're going to talk a little bit about just kind of where things stand for Nebraska at the break and kind of where things are going. I mean, we heard from Matt Rule yesterday for about a half hour on the various successes and deficits of the first 6 games of the season and where they need to improve. So we'll get into that. Talk a little bit offense, a little bit defense. We'll talk special teams because we have to, and go from there. So, Brian, first off, what's on the docket for the bye week? It's like that to-do list for me is just like everything I've been putting off for the last 2 months has to get done in the next 48 hours.
Yeah, that's good on you to get some stuff done. We should just spend this half hour talking about like our house projects. That'd be like middle-aged guy talk.
Yeah.
Like you got some plan with your gutters or something like that. Any exciting things like that?
Yeah, I actually did get some of the gutters done yesterday. So there's that, but lots of other little items to do in the yard, especially. Yeah. Another group with some things to do. Matt Rule talked a little whack-a-mole. I don't have moles in the yard, but
he acted it out.
He even got kind of demonstrative with the whacking. And we're 6 games into this. We'll start here. What's kind of been the most successful mole whacking that Nebraska's done to this point? And actually, it's got to be turnovers, right? But are there other things that come to mind that Nebraska has successfully kind of put to bed at this point, 6 games in? You always knock on wood when you ask that question, but where have they made progress in the first 6 games from last season?
Yeah, turnovers is 1A because they're +6. That ranks 13th nationally. And man, from the things we've seen, right, the last 2 decades with turnovers, I mean, the stories we could tell. So, I mean, they're catching snaps. The ball hasn't hit a guy in motion yet. I still, sometimes when a guy goes in motion, it's no fault of this particular bunch of guys. But from last year, I still expect the snap to hit the guy in the legs or something.
Yep. And I'm just drill him right in the butt. That's that's usually where that was Colorado where it hit him right in the ass, right?
Yeah, I think so. So I'm not wishing that into existence, but it crosses my mind every time. So they're not doing that. Dylan, for the most part, he has 1 bad pick he's thrown. It happened to be the last game, so he's done really well. I think, though, the other thing that's 1B is, and again, we're coming off a performance where it wasn't particularly shining, but I think the intermediate and short passing game is much improved when you think about last year, and you actually have a belief, at least in the first 5 games you did, first 5.5 games, that if it was 3rd down and 8, they might have a shot at it. They might convert it. And it was like a legitimate passing game that could work. And you had a quarterback who could have touch and find the soft spots in a defense. And so just because Dylan had sort of an off finish to the first half of the season, I'm not going to forget here in the progress report, if we're going to be teachers and grade, that the first 5 quizzes were, I think he met the standard and then a little bit above. So I think Rule was right, and it wasn't just pumping up his young quarterback when he said it's been a very good start, and he's got a lot of respect of guys. And the intermediate passing game being a threat again at least makes it more fun football to watch. I'll say that much, because last year it was like, go hide over there, kids. Like when it was, 2nd and 8 or 3rd and 9, you're just like, oh, this is not going to be good. So now you don't always have that feeling.
Is there anything, Matt Rule talked a little bit about this yesterday, but his contention is that the part of the issue on offense is that there's essentially too many talented mouths to feed, and trying to kind of get the ball to Ja'Cory Barney and get it to Fedoni and get it to Banks and get it to Nair. And, and you're not even talking about Jalen Lloyd yet in that group, and guys that need touches. Plus you're trying to establish a run game with the running backs. Is Nebraska moving any closer to a consistent offensive identity in your mind? And if they're not, do they need, like, does it matter? Like, because I think at some point your identity is
Yeah.
that you don't have enough. You know what I mean? Like you're.
Yeah. Do you think? I think they would say their identity, and this isn't easy to like pinpoint with this answer, but it's really working through Dylan and that just trusting. It's their quarterback. It's their freshman quarterback. They trust him in his progressions and that he's going to make the best decision. And wherever that spins it out, so be it. And I think that's the identity. It's the belief in the freshman and that he's going to play pretty well and make good decisions for you. Now, the part that is concerning to me, and I hoped would be I hoped it would be further along is the run game. And I think Rule was acknowledging that yesterday, that there's more out there for that. And I want to be careful how I frame it, because I'm not trying to be just run the dang ball guy where you run into a brick wall. I have no problem if you can move the ball for 400 yards in the air and put up points and do it that way, and you end up with 50 yards rushing. I'm not one of those people who cares about that. That said, I think you saw a warning item on Saturday on a day where there is wind and it's just kind of a tough Midwest weather challenge and things of that nature, where in the second half, you would have loved to seen just that one drive, Bruntz, where the running game's getting 4, 5, it's 3rd and 2, Dylan completes a short one, you do it again, and you move it down on like sort of an 11 play march and you put that game to bed. And they weren't able to do that. And a big part of it was I didn't feel like when they were running the ball, like they could get much of substance going. And so that I know Rutgers can be a salty defense and Greg Schiano is a really good coach and all that. So I put all that out there. But I think when he talks about going from winning football to championship football, at some point you're going to have to develop into that sort of offense running the ball too, where it doesn't mean you are run first or all like it's 1988 again, but it does mean you have those 4-minute drives sometimes where you sort of take the will and bend it from the other team. And they weren't able to do that in Saturday's game. So that was kind of the lasting impression you had of, or the last impression you had of the offense. And so that was kind of a bummer for them heading into the bye.
Yeah, it's interesting with the running game because you see and hear a lot of discussion about, well, why is this not working? And Matt Rule mentioned 180 as a target number yesterday for kind of what they would like to get to open everything else in the offense and kind of make them more dangerous. On one hand, you have an offensive line that, yeah, in very small doses has been able to impose its will on people, but not with any kind of consistency. You also have a group of running backs that, the conversation going into the bye week is how do you make a 4-yard run into a 12-yard run? How do you make a 12-yard run into make a play to take it 40? There's just there's not enough of either of those things. And you're just kind of stuck then in some ways, just kind of running your head into the brick wall at times. And hoping that a 2-yard gain becomes 5. And I think that's my concern, is that when you get into November and you're playing Iowa, you're playing Wisconsin, you're going to go against a better USC defense than what they were a year ago. You're going to need 3 or 4 plays on the ground to break and get 20 on a play or get 25 on a play where, maybe they have it, schemed up well and a guy just makes a play. And I think that's what I'm going to be watching as you get into the second half of the season, is if Nebraska can kind of find the recipe in those November games where the wind is howling to be able to move the ball on the ground or get a couple more chunk plays on the ground, because I don't think you're seeing that with enough consistency. I mean, against Colorado early on, there was a drive where it was just kind of the drumbeat of, 6 here, 8 here, and there just hasn't been enough of that. And I think that also kind of helps. That helps the passing operation too, where you're able to mix your pitches a little bit more, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think you're the same as me. I don't think we are that guy who pounds the table like it's got to be just 60-40 run, and all that stuff. It's just that deal where you do have to have it as more of a weapon than it's been so far.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the bottom line. I think Rule said as much yesterday. So I think that they're on the same page as they're self-reflecting this week. I mean,
defensively, through 6 games, you've had the Colorado game where Nebraska just comes in and dominates, Northern Iowa and Illinois where things looked a little bit more challenging defensively, and then 2 pretty good performances, an excellent performance against Rutgers, pretty good against Purdue too. What do you make of that group? Because when you kind of drill down into the numbers, it's trending in a pretty good way. The pass rush is getting home more than it was last year. You're seeing that the piece of the turnover margin, certainly not giving the ball away, has been huge, but they've also taken it away a little bit too. What do you kind of make of the totality of the first 6 games of the season for that group and what they've done?
It's kind of interesting because like 2 weeks ago or whenever after the Illinois game, it was like we were on a roundabout and everyone was kind of eyeing this, getting off on this, taking the right exit, and talking about maybe the roles have flipped a little bit, like because the offense had a pretty good day against Illinois and the defense scuffled. And I understand what the competition is, but I also am respectful of the fact that there's people like Nick Saban and others who are picking Rutgers to beat Nebraska before that game Saturday. And so you got to remember stuff like that. I mean, that was a good win, challenging at times, especially for the offense. But I thought it was a huge game for the defense going into the bye to have those moments, not just that they stop the other side, but that you're put in these positions where it's sort of the fire alarm is going off. What can you do with it? And obviously the goal line stand, but let's not forget they had to do it again, basically, when Rutgers got the ball at the 28, 1 series later. And that was as good a series as the previous one. I mean, that was the one where Nash broke in and got a sack on 2nd down. Then James Williams started his parade. And so I think the defense, the Illinois game threw us off a little bit. It threw everybody. And I think it threw them, honestly. I think they were shocked that happened to them, the way they talked about it. It was demoralizing. And I think it was really, they were smarting from that game all week. I kind of felt it over there too. It felt weird before the Purdue game.
Yeah.
But they got it together enough to get through that game out there and won it. And then Saturday, I felt was like that stepping stone, like, okay, this is who we can be. Like you kind of heard Ty Robinson in the post game. This is what we're supposed to be. We expect to be this going forward. Obviously, the challenges are going to get tougher. Indiana's rolling. I know they haven't played the greatest schedule, but 47.5 points a game is what it is. And Ohio State after that. So we're going to figure out a lot more, but we're kind of back to where I was at least August 15th with this team. It's like, maybe the defense can be top 10 again in most of the stuff. Can they win turnover margin? And can the offense be like respectable in that, like, 55 to 70 range? And how does that work together? How many wins can you get with that? And maybe that's the path we're on now after like a brief flirtation with going a different direction, or at least we thought maybe. And it turns out it's just sort of as suspected back a month and a half ago.
Yeah, I think you have to, I mean, the narratives coming in, you mentioned Saban picking Rutgers, and a lot of the conversation around that game with Nebraska and Rutgers was, this is a Greg Schiano team. This is a Matt Rule team. These guys are going to be, trading haymakers in the middle of the ring for 4 quarters. And, this is basically as close to a legal street fight as you're going to get in a college football game. And I mean, Nebraska's defense came out and was really kind of the bully in that game. I mean, aside from the first, 2 possessions that Rutgers had on the ground, Nebraska really shut Rutgers' running game down, and that's a good running back they faced. And you're facing a quarterback that, while flawed, has had success against you for another team in your stadium. And Nebraska towards the end of it on defense was really able to impose its will. And I think that I agree with you. The coming out of that Illinois game, even on like Tuesday when you kind of had the parade of players coming through, it felt like they were still kind of not wallowing, but like that loss was still kind of stuck in their craw a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in the way that they played. And I mean, you have a 0-0 game at halftime at Purdue and play really well in the second half there to kind of let the offense take off. You play, 3.5 pretty good quarters of football against a pretty tough physical offense. I think for that group, you're kind of going into the bye week in a perfect way with, we're not a perfect unit by any means, but, you've at least gotten a little bit of swagger back after you had your confidence dinged in the middle of that 6-game series.
Yeah. Also, when you were making the point about how guys were after the Illinois loss, I wrote a couple things about this. And I didn't want to make too much of it, but then Terrence Knighton said something on the radio that gave me sort of confirmation in what I was thinking. And it was just like, it's that idea that you have a group of guys or you're developing that culture where they really hate losing to the point where they expect to win and it just crushes them. Like it was like the world was over when they lost. And it's not the fault of anybody, but sort of the culture over the last decade, it sort of seeped in that it was like, well, that stinks that they lost around there, but it's happened and it happened again. Life goes on, and it does. But I do think it's good that it had an old school vibe after that Illinois game where it's like, man, this absolutely sucks, and I do not want to experience this again or very much this year. And guys were just, I think, were beside themselves about it more than I've seen in the past. I got to be honest. And so I like that. So that's a good starting point because I think that's an important part of your culture where you're building that with your older guys, but also to your younger guys in the years ahead. Like if you have a loss, like Sunday mornings are going to be like, you're not going to want to get out of bed type of feeling. And so that part is good. But also the defense, I thought was in that moment a critical thing was Bruntz. I don't think they panicked. I think they're like, okay, there's a lot of veterans who have played good football here before. Let's believe in what we're doing. Let's maybe adjust some things here and there. And then, you got to give Tony White credit. Rules said this multiple times for his game plan against Rutgers, where he was playing 3 different personnel groupings, playing 2 jacks in the field sometimes, switching it up where there's 3 true linebackers behind 3 down linemen. He was really throwing a lot of stuff at the Scarlet Knights that I don't think they had a good answer for. And after 2 missed tackles on the first series, which was really what it was, 2 guys missed tackles, Manon guy, who I do think is a good back, it was just nowhere. There was nowhere for him to go. They had 70 yards rushing after the first quarter, 78 by the game's end. I mean, that's impressive. So I know these are different types of offenses they're going to face in the weeks ahead, but still, you've got to take that portable rush defense out there first and make sure you take that away and then see where you can do. And then James Williams and guys can have their impact on it.
Yeah. Right now, heading into the bye, Nebraska is, I believe, 5th in sacks right now nationally. The goal coming into the season was they wanted to get to that 40. I think 40 was the number they were shooting for. They're currently at 20, which is tied for 5th. They are like top 50, I think, right now for third down defense, which was always kind of the book on this defense, was a little bend but don't break, but not able to get off the field when it mattered. Even kind of the longer plays from scrimmage, anything longer than 20, Nebraska's done a pretty good job of keeping bottled up. They're top 15 there as well. So there's some things that, especially the pressure part of it, to me, has kind of been the revelation in the first part of the season. Is you've been able to, I mean, we talked about it a lot early in the year about their ability to get home with 4. They've had to bring more pressure and get a little bit more exotic with some pressures, which they have that shot in their bag too. But I mean, when you can run a guy like James Williams out there on third down, you're getting a good rush from Ty Robinson and Nash now. Nash played really well against Rutgers, I thought. And, we haven't even really seen the best yet because he's been kind of dinged up of Jamari Butler. And Cam Linhart's another guy that's kind of had a quiet start to the season, at least based on how he played last year. So it feels like even though that front is playing fairly well right now, it feels like there's still kind of another level that they can take it to in the second half of the season.
Yeah. If you were James Williams and you had your girlfriend over or like company, would you just, how you probably have them like the digital picture set where it switches pictures. Would you just have like somewhere like on a screen, like the last series against Rutgers sort of playing like, and you'd be like, how'd that get there? I know, man, but what I gotta like,
in the fourth quarter, you had 2 sacks, 2 other hurries.
He didn't even technically get a sack on the last series, right? So the 2 sacks came before that, but then the last series, I was watching it back again last night, and every play, he was a problem for him. Like, it was just unbelievable. There wasn't one play where where Rutgers will feel good about it, like how they defended him on that last series. And it was building, as you mentioned, with the sacks prior, but man.
It's kind of remarkable. Like he was working scout team in the week leading up to that because it was not a James Williams, Kai Wallen type game that they were expecting. And
it became one.
it quickly became one.
Well, you remember, like last week, I asked Tony White a question about James Williams and MJ Sherman because they had 2 sacks in the Purdue game, and it was sort of just like commentary on that. And Tony was kind of moved it along, like, yeah, this is a different animal this week, and that's how they were practicing too. So it's understandable. But man, it turned out to be him. MJ Sherman's had a good first half of the season too. I think that's probably somebody people slept on if you think about through spring and summer talk and what he's gotten done. So that's been positive. Sierra Wright is obviously one of the stories of the team, just how good he's been and that dynamic. And then, I felt like Nash and Ty, I know Nash was doing things that the layperson maybe doesn't pick up on, where he's getting doubles and other guys are making plays like John Bullock are feeding off of what he's doing. But Saturday felt like one of those games where it was Ty and Nash both like, this is what it could be like when 2 wrecking balls are both taking turns making plays at big times. Like, it seemed like that kind of game. And if they can get that type of energy going the last half of the season, then you got a fighting chance because everything works around that.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, I don't know if you believe this or not, but it always seems like there's kind of like for seniors who are kind of starting to hear the clock tick a little bit on their careers, like it just seems like there's kind of the last half of the season, like another level that they are able to get to. And, Ty Robinson's in that boat. John Bullock is in that boat. Nash is in that boat. There's a lot of guys that are veterans on this defense that it feels like, okay, are they kind of going to get that like old man bump, I guess, like late in the season? Because you saw from Ty last year, I know he had the decision to make about whether to come back, but it feels like there's those types of performances that are still out there. They're going to need them. I mean, you come out of the bye week and you go on the road at Indiana, on the road at Ohio State. It's going to be, 2 kind of buckle your chin strap type games for that defense against 2 pretty good offenses.
Yeah. And I remember we had a pod like the week of the opener where we were talking about Ty and just throwing out the idea, like, what if we have not seen the full book on Ty Robinson? What does that look like? What does that do to everything? And I think if we're going to do a progress report of sorts, you'd have to say through 6 games, he showed we hadn't seen the full book of Ty Robinson, because I feel like he's at a different level this year. Feels like every game there's 1 or 2 plays where the quarterback is retreating, like back. I wrote this today, but like back 15 or 20 yards, like he's in a video game and he's just like trying to like not die.
Yeah.
I mean, that he did, and Ty did it again. One of the biggest plays of the game Saturday was after Dillon threw the bad pick, the second down, he just blows up the play, sacks him for 9 yards. It ended up being a 4-down stand. I felt like that play like immediately settled things. Like, okay, the defense is like in that mode where that happened, big deal, we'll take care of it. So they just got to keep with that the rest of the way. That's what it's going to take. If this is going to be a special like 9-win season or something like that, they're going to have that sort of mindset going forward. And it starts with those dudes you're talking about on their last go round here.
I always appreciate the, after games, the deluge of photos comes in, and there's always like one or two, or this year there's always been one or two where Ty Robinson, all like 6'6", 315 pounds of him, is like chasing after some poor quarterback, like Happy Gilmore's boss chasing Shooter McGavin through the parking lot, just like full like enveloping him. But yeah, I mean, I if there's another level there, Nebraska is going to benefit greatly from that. Finally, let's finish off with special teams. We're obligated to discuss this. I mean, we can start with Brian Buschini, who Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week, leading passer in the second half against Rutgers, had 2 tackles against Purdue. Nearly got sawed in half on a blocked punt. He had a game. He had a game against Rutgers, but
he did it all. He had everything that you could experience as a punter happen, basically.
Yeah, all good and bad. What is that? I mean, it sounds like Tristan Alvano is going to test to see where he's at during the bye. Nebraska didn't kick a field goal against Rutgers, so that conversation died for at least a week. But I mean, are we just trying to get that group to like to neutral? Like, is that the ceiling?
Neutral would be good. Yeah, put it in neutral like you're going through the car wash. I think Schaefer had the best illustration of when Buschini got hit. It wasn't funny at the time at all, but I'm glad he got back up and you could say remarks like this. But it was like a cartoon character. Like he just got so obliterated on that play. That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
I felt like he was like Wile E. Coyote or something, trying to get himself back. And you saw him, he had like a back brace on and was just working on his back the entire time over there. And the Rutgers return man did him a big favor on the one. He didn't come up and field it, but still 61 yards in the book.
Against the wind.
Yeah, against the wind. And that throw, I know Rutgers was giving him like that option on film, like, okay, fake it, please. Nonetheless, it's still like that's a tough call to make. You're kind of like in this tense game, and it's like, okay, we're going to have our punter throw it 30 yards on this 25-mile-an-hour day. Like
with a bad back.
Yeah. And we're going to trust he's going to put it on the money. And it's hilarious to me, just the visual of him and like Jalen Lloyd at halftime, which was happening like on the little practice field, like working it out. And I just think stuff like that's funny. Like, like you're about to unveil like something that's going to be the talk of this game, and you're just over on a little side field while someone's having a Capri Sun. I don't think they actually do that at this level, but I'd like to think they do.
Orange slices and Capri Sun, probably. Yeah,
but I just that humors me. So I mean, it was just a gutty performance, and Buschini's taking his licks too, as far as like the conversation from like last year and like inconsistencies, and really the last 2 games, you'd have to say he's been one of the MVPs of this team. And so they just got to protect him and not let that become a thing. Hopefully it's just a one-time deal where Rutgers found a little something and you make that crack disappear, because that cannot be an added part to this conversation. The field goal thing is enough.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. And at some point, I do think Nebraska is going to block a punt. I think they're going to block a punt in a game soon, because they're getting close, and they just need to have that game where they make that one more play. And I think they would have felt like, in a way, if Jalen Lloyd had slipped that tackle and went all the way, like it would have kind of at least offset completely like all the other stuff, because you would have had the big score that Rutgers couldn't get off your fault.
Mm-hmm.
But I am worried about it, going in the second half of the season, and there's no way that they can't be either, because these games are going to go down to the wire, and you have to at some point be able to hit a 36-yard field goal. It's just too hard to live or work around that, I think, with the schedule ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the Alvano thing is that's a big storyline going into the second half of the season. If he gives me a little bit more confidence there, if healthy, that he can kind of steady the ship there. The snapping issues are another piece of that too, where you got to get that operation figured out. I mean, you're staring down the barrel of a number of one-score games, like, predictably in November, and you got to be, like you said, you got to be able to kick through a 35-yarder and not have it be a white-knuckled moment just to get the snap back, and to even get the kick off.
The hardest part in sports, it seems like, it doesn't matter which sport, is when attention is really drawn to a weakness, and then everybody's talking about it. That becomes very difficult, I think, mentally to self-correct if you're the person in the middle of that storm. And so these guys who are long snappers, I say this with respect. They've been doing it since they're kids and probably have snapped it back correctly, done well like 100,000 times in their life, And it's just like that. They're going to have to get over that hurdle, like in those games. Like even on Saturday, there was a punt where Buccini picked it off. It was like low. It wasn't terrible, but it was low. And it's a good thing they protected well on that one, because that could have been another problem.
Yeah.
And then there was a false start, or not a false start, a delay of game before the second block punt, which I had even forgot about. And maybe
they got that one off, like, because they got that one off, and then the delay game brought it back, and then that's when it got blocked down to the 2 or whatever it was.
Yeah, it would have been a successful punt, at least, in getting it off. You're right. But the only thing I could think of, because you hardly ever see that, was that they were pondering, perhaps, like, do you do it, and you're kind of going back and forth, and maybe they got in a little late with that they were going to actually kick it. But yeah, all that stuff's just got to get cleaned up. I understand where Rule is coming from in the standpoint of special teams is hard. I think if you're a head coach, like how you handle it, both publicly and with your team, because there's like so many guys involved in it, and a lot of guys probably doing fine. But if you have two key guys who aren't, and then one guy slips up on a block who like even Gifford had a mess up this last game, and you don't expect that. It makes it very hard. That's a very whack-a-mole type of thing within that whole conversation, because you feel like this is good over here, that's good over there. I know everybody's talking about this, but keep doing what you're doing over here. So you've got to get that to your players, like that mindset, like you're doing okay. Like it's not like the whole thing, you got to just throw it in the trash. But those key spots have to figure it out. And it'd be an amazing story if John Hole or Alvano, like in the second half of the season, comes on and they knock a couple in, so that there's always that opportunity. And that's how they need to view it, as like a reset. And this is an opportunity, not an obstacle. It's a chance to show everybody, like, hey, we can win games for this team. And so that's how I'm trying to view it if I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, no, it's and for a team where the margin's so thin, I mean, even just a little crack there, I mean, that can be disastrous. Or, I mean, if you're able to finally get that figured out, I mean, that gives you a little bit more of a space there too.
Well, we could say like, oh, it could decide 2 or 3 games. Wouldn't you say? I mean, it has decided a game. Like if you make that kick against Illinois, maybe you're on the right end of it. So, it's that's the concern. That's the biggest concern, obviously, because the whole offseason's built around a chasing 3 thing, and here's literally, can you find those 3 points when you need them? So I don't know. Is there anything else as you finish that like surprises or that you would emphasize from this first half before we finish off our Capri Sun?
It's interesting. Like, I kind of going back to, I mean, what did you have Nebraska at the midpoint? Did you have them at 5-1?
Yeah. Real quick, I had them 5-1, and I didn't know who it was going to be. It was sort of like, I think they're still going to be
Right.
figuring out some lessons, and there's going to be that. It was Illinois. That was what it was. So yeah, they're where I thought they would record wise.
Because I think your point from earlier is somewhat correct. I mean, you have an offense that is still trying to find itself. You've got a defense that seems to be the strength of the team. Special teams is probably worse off than maybe what you thought at this point. But I mean, it's probably looked a little bit differently in how it's played out. But I mean, the results are kind of, I think, how most people saw the first 6 games going. So we'll see what they can do in the second half against, I think better competition at certain points there.
It's an awesome game coming out of the bye because it's a strange game. It's like Indiana has found it and they're 6-0 and you're on Big Noon. It's going to be one of those like games with some of the most curiosity in college football that weekend, like about these two teams. It's a real big opportunity for Nebraska to end their drought against ranked teams, which stretches back to 2016. And also, just win on that stage, like that kind of game, which I think Colorado was that in a way, but I think if they could go on the road and get that win, it would really have everyone fired up about what the second half can be. So it's an opportunity against a team that it'll be interesting how like Indiana responds to like that stage and like being sort of a central part of college football for that weekend. Cause sometimes teams don't do that well with that. So Nebraska just needs to go in there, make it about football, as they say, and see if Indiana can do the same. Cause that'll be a test for the Hoosiers to like avoid all the distractions and the glitter and lights that are going to come with that game that haven't been around their program.
Yeah, definitely a new thing for them. We'll also make it about football all throughout the bye week.
Yep.
At Husker 24/7. We're going to have lots of recruiting coverage. Nebraska got a big visit weekend over for the Rutgers game, picked up a 2026 commitment. We've got more on that on the site. Plenty of kind of mid-season type content. Just tons and tons of stuff going on at Husker 24/7. So get there. We'll be back with no hype cast this week. You'll have to get hyped on your own for the bye week, but we'll be back with plenty of podcast content next week with Mike Schaefer. For Brian Christopherson, I'm Michael Bruntz. Thanks for listening to the Husker 24/7 podcast.